Good evening, everyone. And I can see already that we've got quite a few people joining us, and looking forward to another history session on Lowestoft with Ivan Bunn. This is episode number 18, and I can assure you Ivan has already prepared a wonderful slideshow presentation to accompany his talk. And tonight the talk is entitled Aspects of Lowestoft's History. So whereas in previous sessions Ivan's been looking at some of the surrounding areas such as Alton Broad and Carlton Colville and Pakefield and those kind of areas, tonight he's looking at a more general area of Lowestoft and more general history. So Aspects of Lowestoft's History will be episode number 18 in the Lowestoft history sessions. We'll be joined by Ivan Bunn in a very short order. And in the meantime, I'm going to shoot over to our comments corner and say hello and good evening to Chris Collins, who says, evening one and all. And hello comes straight from Linda Boyce, who says, hi, everyone. Hi, Linda. Great to know that you two ladies are joining us tonight. And thank you very much for tuning in, as you often do. And now, we love to receive your comments. That's fantastic. It helps us to know that we're engaging with you all. And so thank you very much indeed for doing so. One other thing that we really love is when you click share. If you were able to click share either in your Facebook feed, if you're watching us via Facebook, or in your YouTube, if that's where you're watching us as well, we really value that. So if you could do that, that'd be great. That means that we are able to engage with a few more people if you send it out to your friends and contacts and put it into their feed. Like I say, it helps us to broaden our reach and expand the audience that we're reaching and that Ivan Bunn is able to talk to with regards to Lowestoft's history. We've got another hello. This one comes all the way from Tunbridge Wells, and it's from Mr. Rob Haylock. Rob, I think you're fairly new to us, aren't you? I'm not sure we've come across you before, but good evening to you. Thank you for tuning in. And good evening from Bill Lyman. He actually says good afternoon because he is in South Carolina, USA. Bill, are you on holiday there? I thought you were a local man, but if I've offended you, I certainly hope not. But if you're from South Carolina permanently, why don't you just let us know that? Because like I said, I assumed you were a local boy and bred. You certainly know a thing or two about history and sea shanties. Now, Bill often tunes in to our other streaming thread, which is on a Tuesday night, and that is, as I said, the shanty sessions. That'll feature Stephen and myself usually, but tomorrow night we are returning to the Seagull Theatre to meet up in actual physical terms. We'll be meeting them in real life with our Rogues Shanty Chorus. And on a Tuesday night, we broadcast via the Rogues Shanty Chorus, much in the same way as we are here tonight. But we cannot wait tomorrow night to actually meet with everyone and say hello to them. We'll be diminished in numbers a little bit for social distancing, so we won't have the full brigade in their normal order. But we're really looking forward to it. Now, what that means is, in terms of our normal live streams, it will be a little bit disjointed, and we're not entirely sure how it will go yet. But we are going to be live streaming from about 7:30 via our Rogue Shanty Chorus. So anybody that likes to come along to our Rogue Shanty Chorus, usually when we meet at the Seagull, and cannot do it tomorrow night, for whatever reason, maybe they weren't able to get in with a ticket, or perhaps they're still shielding, but they'd still like to join in some fashion, please do check out the Facebook page or the YouTube page, because we will still be live streaming as the Rogue Shanty Chorus in some fashion from the Seagull Theatre. We've got a few more comments. Bill Lyman comes back in touch. He says, I'm a travelling cruising sailor. I've lived and worked abroad for over 30 years. Bill, no wonder you know your stuff when it comes to the rigging of sailing boats and craft. But that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Rob says, I've been watching the recordings while WFH. Working from home. I'm originally from Lowestoft, so find the sessions very interesting. Thanks to you and Ivan for your efforts. Well, thank you very much, Rob. I think it must be the first time or one of the first times that you've commented, which is why I've not seen your name before, but thank you very much. Chris Collins says shared. Thank you, Chris. Very kind of you. Jackie Draper says evening all. Hi, Jackie. As I was just mentioning, if you're not able to join us tomorrow at the Seagull Theatre, perhaps you'll be tuning in to the live stream that we're going to put out. I have one last from Chris Collins. She says, I wish. I wonder what you wish. Do you wish you could join us? Because as I was just saying to Jackie, you're very welcome to join us online tomorrow night. Bill, if you're interested, you could perhaps join us for one of our live stream chats. Probably not tomorrow because we'll be a bit busy at Seagull, but why not get in touch with us if you fancy having a chat about your experiences traveling around on cruising on sailboats and ships in the last 30 years. I think our audience would love to know some of that, and I certainly would, because I'm fascinated by that kind of lifestyle. I think it's fantastic. Anyway, we've talked, and well, I've talked. And I'm sure the person that you really want to hear talking is Mr. Ivan Bunn. So without further ado, joining us tonight with Aspects of Lowestoft's History, episode number 18 in the Lowestoft History Sessions, is our very own wonderful Ivan Bunn. Hello, Ivan.
Good evening, all. Nice to be back again. Can't believe 2 weeks has gone since the last one. Sorry, I'm just sorting out my timepiece on here so I can keep an eye on the time and I don't burble for more than 3 hours. There we go. That's better.
Is it a nice old-fashioned egg timer, or is it just a watch?
It's a watch with a piece of blue tack secured to the desk. There you go.
So very high tech, then. Yeah.
High tech. Oh yeah, yeah.
Won't let you down.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Chris and Linda. I've made notes of your names so I can actually say, and Rob, all the way from South Carolina. I've just been reading some very interesting books about the very early history of South Carolina, so it's kind of fitting tonight. And Rob, Tunbridge Wells, Jackie, and anybody else who signed on, it's lovely to be back again with you. I hope you're all doing well, and I hope you got to enjoy tonight's talk. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about what I'm doing tonight. I've called it Aspects of Lowestoft History because it's going to cover literally from Anglo-Saxon times right the way through almost literally to the present day. Now, obviously, it's not going to be a long continuous story. So I picked out historical aspects of the town's history to illustrate how it grew, how it changed, and what have you. Some of the aspects that I focus in on, I've already done in-depth talks about. So I will go mention the last of witch trial, which if you want to learn more and you haven't seen the original one that I did a few months back, you can still get to watch that. I'll explain as I go along. So really, it's just an overview, if you like, aspects of parts of the town history. And I emphasize it's only parts. I could probably do this again in a fortnight and pick out another 2 or 3 dozen aspects that I'm not dealing with tonight. So, and of course, the bigger the town gets, the more complex it becomes. And there are more aspects to look at. So I picked out some that I hope you'll find interesting. It's been a bit of a challenge putting it together, I must admit, but it's been fun. It's kept me off the streets. So,
kept you off the streets.
Yeah. So I'm really pleased that you've all joined us. Ping up a few comments. I can't see them, but Stephen will read them out. Sorry, I'm just making certain my papers are in order here. Yep. Okay.
I'm just going to pick up a couple of things you said about the Lowestoft witch trials, because last week, which was more from the witch finders side of things, I know that went down an absolute storm. And as you said, anybody that's interested could scroll back through the different episodes, of which this is number 18. All of the previous 17 are available on Facebook, and most of them available on YouTube as well. And as Ivan mentioned, there was one specifically on a couple of the ladies' stories involved in those trials, and you can find them if you just scroll back. Don't do it right now, because stay right here with us and watch number 18. Also, if you had an interest in it, you could purchase this book, which is edited by Henry Baker and featuring a foreword by Ivan Bunn. It's called The Trial of the Lowestoft Witches, a facsimile of the original report of the trial of Amy Denny and Rose Cullender. But as I said, that's only if you've got a mind to. In the meantime, number 18, featuring Mr. Ivan Bunn, the Lowestoft History Sessions and Aspects of Lowestoft's History.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, everyone. Right, we'll get into this. Hopefully it's not going to run for too long. As I explained a moment ago, I've called it Aspects of Lowestoft's History because I'm going to look at aspects and topics of the town's history gone way back when, and slowly working through time so we can see how Lowestoft changed, how it grew, how it prospered, some of the upside, some of the downside. Here's some of these slides you might have seen before. I do use them in other talks that illustrate points. This is basically modern Lowestoft, and of course what we have to do first is strip away all the modernity. So here we have the parish of Lowestoft now, but of course back in the day, medieval period, the town itself was a tiny little cluster of houses perched along the top of the cliff in the northeast corner of the parish. So that's where I want to start this evening and have a look at where we came from, how we got here, how the town got here. And so the first thing we need to look at is the name of the town, which is Lowestoft. Now, the Toft element tells us that this is a Scandinavian settlement. Lowestofts seems to be the most likely origin of the name of Lowestoft, and Lover being a Scandinavian family name. So it means a toft means a house or a homestead, a small farm, a small holding, we don't know quite what. So this is the house or the homestead of the extended family of a Scandinavian. We don't know what from whereabouts in Scandinavia, possibly Norwegian, because some of the words around that are used are Norwegian in origin. So this is the house or the homestead of an extended family called Lover. And we'll see more Scandinavian influences in names as I go through this evening. So we go to the next slide, please, Stephen. Here's a map that I'm sure you'll be familiar with. This is a parish map dated 1618, drawn by myself with the aid of my wonderful fellow historian, David Butcher, whom I'm sure many of you are aware of his work. He found in the archives, he found a complete survey of the whole of the parish dated 1618 in Latin, which he translated, and then using later maps, we were able to reconstruct it. So this is 1618. It wouldn't have been like this at the time I'm talking about. There'd be very little cultivated land. Now you have to remember as well, if we go back to the Roman period, to the Saxon period, and that the sea levels were much higher, and the sea would be literally breaking on the foot of the cliff along by Wappaload Road, and Lake Lothing would be a great inlet of the sea. And the two settlements that would become Lowestoft, Lowestofts, we're talking about here, were not located on the cliff top as they are today, but they're located, I say there because I'll explain in a moment, there's actually two settlements here that merge eventually. The major settlement, Lowestoft, is to the south of the Parish Church. Of those, as you can see, hopefully on the map, there's the church immediately above the big splurge that I put on there, the grey area. That's the settlement on a south-facing slope away from the cliff top, and it seems to have been there simply because the water table was so much higher. We know that today where Rotterdam Road is, that was a great inlet from the sea. And so that would be a sheltered point in which to launch boats for fishing, etc., without having to venture out into the sea itself. And so that's Lowestofts. And even in 1618, you can see there's still strip farming going on there, the medieval strip fields, which probably date back to the settlement. We don't know when the settlement was there, but certainly there's been people living there for thousands of years prior to Lowestoft. Prehistoric axes have been found in the area from time to time, and there's evidence of settlement there. The other settlement, and I'll come on to that at the moment, is called Aikthorpe. Now, as I said, Toft is means a household or a settlement, an extended one, a primary settlement. A thorp is a secondary settlement, and up to and including the area around the present church, and we'll come on to the reason for that in a moment, there was another smaller settlement called Aikthorpe. Aikthorpe. Aik is the old Norse word for the oak trees, or for an oak or oaks, and Thorpe means a lesser settlement. So you've got the primary settlement of Lowestoft on the sheltered south-facing slopes below where today's modern Parish Church stands, in the Denmark Road area, to the north of Lowestoft Cemetery, those who are familiar with Lowestoft. And you've got to the northwest of that a smaller settlement called Aikthorpe. So we have Lowestoft and we have Aikthorpe. Now, we'll discuss why these settlements possibly moved in a moment, but we'll move on to the next slide and have a look at what was here in 1086 when the Domesday survey was taken. So let's see what was here in 1086. And here is the original entry from the Domesday book. And you can see just off centre on the top line, it says Lowestofts. That's how it was recorded in Latin. And this is what it actually tells us was here. Now, Lowestoft, the lands of Lowestoft, and there were 450 acres of arable land, as you can see, was an outlier. Now, it means that the lands actually all belong to another manor, the paramount manor of Lothingland, which was at Galston. So in actual fact, it's an outlier of the manor of Galston. It's not a manor in its own right. And so what was there in 1086? 450 acres of arable land. And where it says then and now, then means in the time of Edward the Confessor in Saxon times, and now means how many people are living there now. So first of all, we have the villagers, the villains, as they were called. They would farm a fair bit of land belonging to them, themselves, but they would own service to the lord of the manor, and therefore would have to do some of the work on the manorial lands free of charge. But there was 5 villages living here in the time of Edward the Confessor, shall we say 100 years earlier, a little bit less than that probably. But by the time of 1086, there's only 3. Then we get the smallholders. These are the bordars. These are the ones who hold literally very small amounts of land and a much tighter tied to the manor at Galston. So again, they have to they own service to the lord of the manor. Then they tell us there were serfs, the slaves. There were 5 slaves back in the day, but at the time of the survey, there's only 3. And again, there's been a drop off in the number of people. The slaves owed nothing. They had no land. They were literally slaves to the lord of the manor. They were his beck, and they were the ones that didn't have to do any work for themselves because they had no lands. They had nothing, and they were literally slaves. They were the serfs. And they tell us a plough team was of 8 oxen. So there's always 2 plough teams belonging to the lord. Then 5 men's ploughs, but now only 3. So the number of ploughs has diminished again since the Anglo-Saxon times. There's woodland for 8 pigs. That's a little bit confusing because they measure the amount of woodland by how many pigs could graze there in the underwoods. The number of men's ploughs has diminished from 5 in the time of Edward the Confessor to only 3. Again, the number of villages have actually diminished. So presumably that's why there's not so many plough teams. There's, as I said, there's woodland for 8 pigs. There's meadow for 5 acres of meadow, 14 cattle. Now 8, that means milch cows, always 11 pigs. That is a bit of a conundrum because there's only woodland for 8 pigs. So what they did with the other 3, I'm not sure. And 160 sheep. So there will be sheep walks here as well, open grazing for the sheep, as well as 450 acres of arable land and the meadow and woodland. So that's what we get at Lowestoft, quite a substantial settlement. And as I said, it's not on the cliff top, it's further inland, 3/4 of a mile inland, close to where the parish church is. And next we get a clue from Aikthorpe. Aikthorpe, which is called Aikthorpe with the Domesday Survey, was owned by, there lived a free man. He wasn't tied to anybody, and he had his own one little manor, and only 80 acres as a manor. And he always had 3 little villages, just 3 small holders, 1 plough that belonged to him in lordship, and half a men's plough. There's not enough land to have a whole plough team, so they only have half a plough team. There's woodland for 5 pigs, 1 acre of meadow, 3 pigs, 48 sheep, and it's got a value of 10 shillings. That's what, because all of this land in actual fact belongs to the king. So that's how much he has to, it's valued at for the king. Remember, the Domesday Survey is it's William the Conqueror working out exactly what he's conquered and what it's worth. There's no value in Lowestoft because Lowestoft being part of the manor of Galston, therefore the value is included in the Domesday Book entry for the main manor at Galston. And it's been calculated that the total population would be approximately 90 to 100 people. So I could do a 1-hour talk about the Domesday Book and its implications, and but obviously there's not time for that tonight. So, but hopefully that gives you some idea what we've got here in 1086 and what we had here before the Battle of Hastings in 1066, when it was all Anglo-Saxon. So if we move to the next slide, please, we need to look at why there was a move to the cliff top. We know that certainly in the early medieval period, the 12th, 13th, 14th century, a tremendous amount of longshore drift, sands were building up along this coast and forming what would become the Denes, and possibly blocking up the entrance to Lake Lothing. So there's a sandbar there. So and eventually the settlement at the old Lowestofts settlement, 3/4 of a mile inland, gravitated to the top of the cliff. There they could now launch their boats safely from the Denes that had grown up. The Denes being those very wide open sandy sand dunes, if you like, between the foot of the cliff and the sea. And coming down the is it possible just to take me back one click on that, Stephen, please? And another one. And just go forward one, please. Thank you. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, so the move to the cliff. So I've explained why probably they had to move. And Lowestoft and the adjoining Cliffcot towns are famous for their scores. Now, here's an aerial view of Gunton today. Gunton immediately to the north of Lowestoft. And you can see these sandy tracks going down the cliff. They're there today. And it appears that they were, if you can imagine Lowestoft before the town was built, you would have seen a view similar to this. Make a note in particular of the track along the foot of the cliff before you come to the sand dunes, to the Denes, and also the track along the top of the cliff. And these tracks down the cliff, they're caused by rainwater. When it rains heavy, it scours out the cliff. And here's a perfect example of a photograph that I took of one a year or two back. And these would become what were known as the scores of Lowestoft, and we still have them here today. The word score comes from the Old Norse word skura, which means to cut or to incise, and that's where we get the modern word to scour something, to cut a slot. And these became natural ways down the cliff. As the town developed at the top of the cliff, this move seems to have taken place in the late 1200s, the early 1300s. People are gravitating to the cliff top. Whether they went in ones or twos, whether the whole community moved, we don't know. But these tracks would become incorporated into the town as it grew and became known as scores. And these scores would enable people to get from the street at the top of the cliff where the houses are built down to the roadway. Today it's Wapload Road in Lowestoft, and onto the sand dunes from which to launch their fishing boats. So these are the scores. And for anybody not familiar with Lowestoft scores, if we click to the next slide, you briefly see what we've got here today. So these are, I put some older pictures up apart from one modern one. These are the modern scores of Lowestoft. These are the ancient scoured trackways before the town was built that are preserved because they are the easiest way to get up and down the cliff to the Denes below. Most of these are late Victorian Edwardian photographs, apart from the coloured one, which is one that I took the other day. So these are Lowestoft scores, and hopefully in a moment we should see where they are or were. Yeah, so here we can see a map of the town. The High Street you can see is the road on the left-hand side, and the scores go down to Wapload Road along the bottom. Just the same configuration as at Gunton, where there's a track along the top of the cliff and a track along the bottom of the cliff. And there's the names of the scores: Mariner Score, Crown Score, Martin Score, Rant Score, Wild Score, Maltster Score, Spurgeon Score, Herring Fishery Score, and 3 scores that have lost, Frost Alley Score, Mildrum Score that went in the 17th century, and Liar's Score, which was even further south. At the time this move was taking place, the king granted the outlier of Galston, which was, as I said, a part of the manor of Lowestoft. He made it a manor in its own right. And in 1306, the king granted the outlier of Galston, which was part of the manor of Galston, he grants it to John de Drew, the Earl of Richmond. So he now is the lord of the manor of Lowestoft. And all the manorial lands that had once belonged to Galston, an outlier from Galston, now exist with their own lord of the manor and their own manorial set up to govern themselves. When they were an outlier, they were actually overseen and governed and managed from the paramount manor at Galston. But now Lowestoft has become an independent manor with John de Drew as lord of the manor. I should hasten to point out that until the 19th century, the lord of the manor never actually lived at Lowestoft. The lord of the manor had many manors, and these were, and Lowestoft was quite a small one compared with some of the holdings. And as I say, John de Drew, who's actually French, became the Earl of Richmond. And that's his coat of arms that you can see there. So you can see by 1306, this is around about the same time the town is being established on the cliff top. Changes are taking place in the governance of the area. It's becoming an independent manor and an independent parish. So if we go on and have another look at what's happening, this is 1306. Another indication that the town is growing and becoming established on the cliff top is the fact that very shortly after the king granted the manor to the Earl of Richmond, on the 5th of November 1308, only 2 years later, this is the time the town is getting established, by a royal warrant, Lowestoft was granted the right to hold a weekly market and an annual fair. Markets by law had to be at least 8 miles apart. So there's Beccles Market, there's the market Southwold, there's the market Great Yarmouth, all roughly 8 miles away from the market that was granted at Lowestoft. So Lowestoft now becomes a market town. It's growing on the cliff top, it's expanding, lots of work are being done. You can see though, this is the lay subsidy of 1327. The lay subsidy was a tax, a flat rate tax on 1/20th of the value of every person's movable goods in the country. And it was imposed by Edward III to finance his war against Scotland. And hopefully you can see the scale here. I put Beccles, so this is the area that we're covering, the Lothingland 100 in the map. And you can see I put Beccles on there as a comparison. By 1327, Beccles was a flourishing market town. But if you look up the amount of tax that was collected from each of these parishes and townships, you can see that Lowestoft is way, way down. It's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the smallest community tax-wise in this whole area. Galston is a much bigger place. Kessingland, Mutford, Corton, Carlton, Pakefield, Blunderston, Somerleyton, they're all in actual fact busier and more prosperous towns than Lowestoft in 1327. This is around the time again that the town is becoming established. So it's a small community growing not particularly rapidly on the cliff top as it moves away from the old site 3/4 of a mile inland, and at the same time it seems to absorb the small manor of Akethorpe. Akethorpe was kept by a freeman by the name of Aylmer, and Aylmer, we're told in the Domesday Book, was a priest. So there was almost certainly a church of some type, a Christian church in 1086, where the present day Parish Church stands today. And Lowestoft seems, after it kind of absorbed Akethorpe, the parishioners of Lowestoft and the old Akethorpe, they actually resorted to the little church that belonged to Aylmer the priest in 1086. A little bit more about the church in a minute. So you can see the community is slowly developing into not a very prosperous little town at the moment, but it's developing on the cliff top. So we move to the next slide, please. One of the very, very few medieval cellars in Lowestoft High Street. This is one of them, and it dates from the early 14th century. We don't know the exact date, and this appears to be the cellar of a wealthy merchant's house on the High Street along the cliff top. It's under number 161, the High Street, and there are evidence of other similar cryptid cellars along the High Street. That's the best preserved. The Parish Church was rebuilt in 1483. St Margaret's Church was rebuilt in 1483. It's dedicated to St Margaret of Antioch. She became a very, very popular saint when she was canonized and added to the assigned a saint's day, July the 20th in the year 1222. Before that, there's possibly not many churches there. So again, the date of the building of the first stone church rather than wooden one of Aylmer dates probably from the early 1300s and is dedicated to St Margaret of Antioch. And by 1483, the church is actually rebuilt into the wonderful edifice that we know today. Again, if we go on to the lay subsidy of 1527, so we're 200 years after the first lay subsidy that I showed you, you can see the amount of money that was collected in taxation from Lowestoft is greater than anywhere else. So in that 200 years, Lowestoft has grown from being one of the smallest communities in this area of the Lothing Land 100. It's grown into being, by a long chalk, the most, the wealthiest of the parishes and townships in this area. Again, Lowestoft in 200 years, literally just over 200 years, 250 years, has gone from being a small backwalk to on the cliff top to being the most substantial town in the whole of this area of the Lothing Land 100 that you can see on the map that I've drawn there. So the lay subsidy of 1527. Excuse me while I have a sip of water, and we'll go on to the next slide. So 1618 map pops up again. This we're pretty certain is an accurate depiction based on the survey of the town in 1618. And thanks to later maps, myself and my colleague David Butcher have been able to reconstruct the thing. But the question now is, we've got a functioning town. Who managed the town and the parish? It didn't run itself. It had to be managed. It had to be governed, if you want. And so there are two main bodies that are now governing Lowestoft, which has now become a fully functional town with its market, its weekly market, its annual fair, and so there's two main bodies that are looking after governing, managing the town and the parish. The first is the church, with a small group of people called the vestry, a small committee, if you like. There's still parish vestries in the country, in the Church of England today. They would meet once a year under the chairmanship of the rector of the parish, who was always appointed by the lord of the manor. And so we've got the rector. He would appoint two church wardens, whose job would be to look after the fabric of the church and make sure everything was okay. He would appoint 4 overseers of the poor. Their job would be to go around to take the poor rate from the house owners and distribute the money to the poorest impoverished people in the parish. 2 surveyors of highways were appointed by the parish, by the vestry. Their job was to look at the roads and streets of the town and the parish and to see if any of them were needed repair and to organise the repairs. There's the parish clerk, who was the clerk to the rector, kept the church records. And then there was the sexton, who oversaw the outside of the church, the churchyard, possibly dug the graves as well. So that's the parish vestry. The other people that the other court that met was the manor court. There's 2 courts there. There's not 2 courts. There's 1 court with 2 functions. That's a better way to put it. There was a court baron, as it was called. It meant monthly. There was a steward who acted for the lord of the manor, who was an absentee. There was a bailiff. His job was to go around and make sure all the people paid their rent to the lord of the manor. He would collect that. The manor court would meet monthly, and there was a panel, a homage, the jury, as it was called, of 35 chief tenants, I beg your pardon, 35 chief tenants. These were known as chievers. You became a chiever if you happened to have a small piece of land or sometimes a building that was known as a chief tenement. If you were if you bought that land or you rented that land, you then had to sit on the jury of the manor court, on the homage of the manor court. So these were the 35 chief tenements, whose probably the records show date back to the late medieval period. And each of the tenements, the chievers, the chief tenements had names. There's 35 of them. The main job of the court baron, as this was called, was to deal with disputes and complaints and the transfer of copyhold property. I'm going to say a few words about copyhold property in a moment. Now, at Easter every year, the manor court would sit with the homage, the jury, the bailiffs, and the steward overseeing it. And before they conducted the business of the court baron, they would hold the annual yearly court leet. The purpose of the court leet was to appoint all the town officials. They appointed, and remember, all of these jobs are unpaid as well. If you don't do them, you get a hefty fine. And so they would appoint 4 constables for the year, an ale taster, a leather searcher. These two would make certain that the leather and the ale came up to the right statutory quality, a swine reeve who would look after the pigs, a pinder. The pinder, in each manor, there was a pound. This is where, and if anybody's cattle strayed from the fields, broke down fences and strayed and that, the pinder's job was to go around, round up the cattle, put them in the pound and lock the door. Usually there's a lovely circular pound out at Blunderston, still in existence, and big brick one. They would put the strayed animals in there until the owner came to collect them and paid a fine. And that's basically where we get the expression to impound something. There was a swine herd to look after the pigs of the manor. There was a neat herd. Neat is the old name for large cattle, cows, bulls, and what have you. And I haven't put it on there. There was also a shepherd for the manor as well. So this meets first on before the court baron in Easter week every year, the court leet, and the job was also to deal with misdemeanors within the township, nuisances and petty crime up to 40 shillings, up to £2. Any crimes that were reckoned to be in excess of that, then they had to go to the quarter sessions and possibly to the assize court. And the nuisances are wonderful when you read the manor court books. They run from, there's one in one of the scores there in, I can't remember that, in the mid 1600s, where a butcher in Rant score, one of the scores, is fined at the court for throwing sheep's heads in the gutter down the score and blocking the gutter when it rained. People leaving ladders in the street to the detriment of passers-by, not keeping the path in front of the house in the street paved. These had small fines imposed on them. And so that's the court leet. And we know, thanks to David's wonderful work demographically using the parish records, building up a picture of Lowestoft in the 16th, 17th century, that the population was somewhere between 1,800 to 2,000 men, women and children. We'll pass on to the next slide, please. I mentioned Copyhold Property. A very, very quick explanation what it was. Copyhold Property were any property, the land on which on which the property was built belonged to the lord of the manor. And every year, I beg your pardon, not every year, every time the property changed hands. So if I'm a Copyhold Property owner, and I own the house that I live in, but it's copyhold, and most of the land in Lowestoft was copyhold. I could sell the property, but I then had to go to the court baron and before the jury, tell them who I'd sold the property to, and they would fine me. I had to pay a small fine, and then the person I'd sold the property to would have to beg to be admitted to the piece of land on which the house stood that I had sold to him. He would be then formally become a tenant a copyhold tenant of the manor, and he too would have to pay a fine. And this is how the lord of the manor made his money. And most of the property in Lowestoft was copyhold and belonged to the lord of the manor, probably from the right back from the time when the manor was first formed. And that map of the town that you can see there, I don't know if you're familiar with it. I'll just quickly point out where, if you know Lowestoft very well, right at the very top of that, you've got today's modern Bellevue Park on that triangular piece of land, close to where the lighthouse stands. Then you come all the way down the high street, right the way down to the bottom of Old Nelson Street. Again, if you're not familiar with the town, that probably doesn't mean that. So the town area covers that triangular area. It's all copyhold land, apart from the speckled areas, which are in actual fact common land. Lord of the Manor owns the land, but they're common. People can graze their cattle, etc., on these commons. Interestingly enough, the two areas that I've coloured in green on this map are freehold. They're not copyhold. For some reason, those two areas do not belong to the lord of the manor. The properties are not copyhold for some reason. Again, it's the property, it's the land to the north of modern Mariners Street, all the way nearly up to St Margaret's Road, and down below it's down by the Triangle Market, southwards, down a little way down modern Old Nelson Street. Those two blocks, copyhold. They're called copyhold because every time the property changed hands, as I explained, they had to make you had to surrender the property to the lord of the manor if you were the owner, and then the guy who's buying it would come and ask to be admitted to tenant and pay the fines. And each of the two people in the transaction would be given a copy of the entry of this transaction that was in the Manor Court books. And the Manor Court books for Lowestoft, off the top of my head, I think they continuously, with the exception of one missing volume in the mid 1600s, from I think 1580 to when copyhold was finally abolished in 1926. Again, copyhold is a fascinating thing. And on the left here, thanks to the courtesy of the Suffolk Record Office, here's just one page of the one of the Manor Court books of Lowestoft recording copyhold property. So if you live in Lowestoft and you want to trace the history of your property, if it's an old property, particularly in the high street, the record of its changing of hands will be diligently recorded in the Manor Court books of Lowestoft. So the place that I'm sitting in at the moment, my rather untidy den here, was once copyhold, as was my house, the other part of the house. These were two properties, and in the early 16th century, this place that I'm sitting in is described as all that piece of land measuring 17 feet by 15 feet, with a house with a building thereupon erected, but it doesn't say what it is. And from that, I can trace this property forward in time until in the 19th century it was possible it could be enfranchised, and you could actually, for a lump sum, purchase the copyhold, and then it would be declared a freehold property. My property was one of the last copyhold properties in this north end of the town to become freehold. I think it was about 1923 it ceased to be a copyhold property. So we'd go on to the next slide, please. I don't want to spend too long on that. Now, plague and pestilence. We know from the town records, from the Register of Burials in Lowestoft, which exists today. The page of that just came and went, as you saw. Been able to calculate the death rate in the town. And we know that from certainly 1601 to 1625, there was quite some outbreaks of plague or pestilence. I don't know what it is or was. We're looking at a town of roughly 1,800, 2,000 people. And here are the stats of it. And you can see that between 1601 and 1625, in a small town of less than 2,000 people, there were a total of 1,295 burials, so presumably deaths. Unfortunately, we have no idea what happened when the Great Black Death hit this area in 1347, 48, 49, when it's reckoned in some places, certainly in Great Yarmouth, almost half of the population died. But you can see here, there was a peak, a really bad peak in deaths in that 25-year period between 1601, 1625. There were one or two outbreaks of plague and pestilence in the very late 1500s, as reflected there, and then it tails off again till the 25-year period, 1651 to 75, when in actual fact it dropped quite low again. But we know that there were great outbreaks of pestilence at that time in Lowestoft. So that's another aspect of the town history in which a lot more research could be done. So we'll move to the next slide, please. The 17th century in Lowestoft doesn't seem to have been, seems to be a century of misfortune, and if you like. Can we change the slide, please, Stephen? Thank you. I'm not going to dwell at length on this. Oliver Cromwell came to the town on the 14th of March 1643 with 6 troops of dragoons, foot soldiers, etc. And he thought there was an uprising by the royalist gentry of this area. And he came to the town and he arrested, I think it was 14 local wealthy gents and some strangers and took them off. They finished in prison in Windsor Castle. I did a full-length talk about this. I don't know how long ago it was, but if you wanted to see the details, you could backtrack to that quite easily. So I won't cover it. But so we've got pestilence, we've got war, and we've got fire. And we're told, here's the town of Lowestoft. And we're told that on the 10th of March 1645, and it's recorded in the town records, there's no doubt about it, a very strong northeasterly gale at the very north end of Wapload Road in a fish house, not far from where Lighthouse Score is today. A fire started there, and this northeasterly gale blew the flames along Wapload Road, setting fire to more fish houses. It eventually spread up the cliff to the houses along the high street and went down as far again. If you're familiar with the town, it went down as far as modern Rant Score. So if you look at the photograph there, that's an early photograph of Lowestoft High Street, the entrance to Rant Score, where the fire eventually stopped spreading, set fire to all of the houses, or the houses that stood on the site of these houses on the right-hand side as you look up the high street. And again, the records show that at one point up further up the high street, as my little map I hope indicates, we know by looking at the properties as listed, and I'll come on to them in a moment, we know that it actually leapt across the road somewhere there where the Crown Hotel is and started to set fire to houses there. Rant Score, as some of you know, is the widest of the scores in Lowestoft, and it looks as if it acted as a fire break. Possibly the wind was abating as well. There was a large plot of land immediately to the north of the score at that time with no buildings on it, and this is where the fire seems to have been stopped, but not without doing some considerable damage. And we do have, the town does have the records of exactly what damage was done. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Stephen. This is a list of all the people who lost property, had their houses destroyed, fish houses destroyed, or goods destroyed. 19 dwelling houses went, 17 fish houses were destroyed, and you can see the total damage done was £10,297, 2 shillings and 4pence. Using a calculator on the Bank of England website, that calculates up today, according to the Bank of England's projections, of that's the equivalent of £2,403,614. I'm sure that's give or take a few quid there, but nearly £2.5 million by today's standards of damage were done in Lowestoft by that fire. And these records actually come from the Gillingwater's History of Lowestoft in 1780. I've scanned them from there. I'm fortunate to have a copy of his History of Lowestoft. And these are transcribed from the original records that are held in the Norfolk Archive, the Norfolk Record Office. So this is an accurate thing. And also, if you ever go to the Heritage Workshop Centre in Lowestoft down Wild Score, myself and David Butcher have written a concise, not appraisal, the word I'm looking for, a precise history of that fire, what happened, when it happened, how it happened, in particular, all of the properties that we've been able to identify that are listed here. We've been able to identify them today, where they stood. That enabled us to build up this fire map, and we've published that. And the Heritage Workshop Centre in Lowestoft, I think I've still got copies of those if anybody's interested. So that's the Great Fire of Lowestoft, if you like. And we're going to push on to the next slide, please. Again, this is going to be pretty brief. I'm thinking of putting a talk together. We had a great dispute with Great Yarmouth down the years. And Yarmouth was a much bigger and more important town than Lowestoft. It was granted a charter of incorporation and became a self-governing town in the year 1208, when Lowestoft still probably didn't exist on the cliff top, or very few houses were there at that time. Then in 1357, as Lowestoft was becoming established, the Statute of Herring was enacted, which said that nobody could land herring within 7 lucre, whatever a lucre was. Nobody's quite certain then or now. 7 lucre of the town of Great Yarmouth. It was later decided that a lucre should be a mile, and it's a long story anyway. But there was this great dispute that actually, in fact, was still rumbling on in the early 1700s, and it started in 1357. The act was revoked, reinstated, revoked, reinstated. In the 1659, Yarmouth actually sent a man of war that anchored off Lowestoft to prevent anybody landing fish here and driving them up to Yarmouth to sell their fish, according to this statute of herrings. Then they had to pay the dues to the bailiffs of Great Yarmouth. But I said that's a very, very long and complex story. But again, it's all part of what I call unsettled 17th century Lowestoft. Now we'll move on again, if we may, to the next slide. Again, I'm not going to talk much about this because once again, I've done an in-depth presentation a month or two back that you could see if you haven't seen it, didn't see it when I did it live. You can still see the presentation again. The story of the trial of Rose Cullender and Amy Denny, the trial of the Lowestoft witches in 1662, and it says 1664 on the cover of the trial report. But incidentally, if you want to read the full trial report, that's the one that Stephen showed you just before I started this talk, that is available. It's only available in Waterstones at Lowestoft. And these two old ladies were accused of being malevolent witches by their neighbours. They were taken to Bury St Edmunds, to the assize court, tried, found guilty, and were hanged at Bury St Edmunds on the 17th of March 1662. So as I said, I always call Lowestoft the 17th century Lowestoft the troubled century. There seems to have been more going on in that period in the town, what with plague, fire, and I know in actual fact that there were some floods in the low-lying lands to the south of the town, round by modern-day Lake Lothing. The half tax was levied. The half tax was levied in 1662 by Charles II when he came to the throne. You had to pay a tax on your halves, and it's because when he was reinstated after the death of Oliver Cromwell and his son Richard, Charles II came back. He had a £300,000 shortfall in his budget, so he instituted the half tax. I'm sorry, Stephen. Do you mind just pinging me back one slide and then forward again? That's it. Now come forward again. Thank you. Sorry about that. So this is the one we see there. So here's the half tax, and the information that gives us is the size of the town: 148 houses, 6 empty, 36 subdivided houses in the town. So we got 154 houses, including the empty ones. Some are now divided into tenements, and there are 548 hearths. And again, the population was reckoned to be, by David Butcher's demographic work on the town, in the region 2,000 men, women, and children. So that just gives us some idea that of the town. Again, there's scope for research here. You could go around to the half tax records that have actually been for Suffolk that have been printed and published. They are in the record office at Lowestoft when it finally opens, and they will stay there. They're printed books, they're not archived material. If you were so inclined, you could go and look at all the surrounding towns and villages around Lowestoft. You could actually work out the sizes of some of the others proportionate to the number of hearths in Lowestoft. It's quite an interesting exercise to do. So we move on to the next slide, please. Not a lot of people know this, as they say. Lowestoft's lighthouse, the Highlighter as it's known, was established in 1609, and it was the very, very first lighthouse ever to be erected in England that we know of. It was erected in 1609. It stood further south than the one. This is the predecessor of the modern lighthouse. The original 1601 was a little bit further south, and it burnt down, funnily enough, because it was coal fired. The new one was built in 1626, and it's the site of the present day highlight, as it's called. The highlight because it's on the cliff top, and at the bottom of the cliff, dating from the 1626 lighthouse, the second lighthouse, a low light was also built on the Deans, and here's a view of it. It was a wooden structure, movable, with a red light. The problem was that the channels between the sandbanks off Lowestoft to bring you into the deeper inshore waters, which are known as the roads, they tended to move, and the channels between the sandbanks also moved. And so as the channels moved, so the lighthouse on the bottom, the low light, would actually be moved, so that if you were sailing into Lowestoft, there's no harbour at this time. As you can see, the boats had to anchor in the deeper water closer to the shore. Then you get the sandbanks, then you get the main ocean itself. These deeper channels just offshore were known as the roads, and to get to the roads you had to come through the channels between the sandbanks, and there was one main channel here in the north end of the town, and whenever the sandbank shifted, as they did quite recently, and the channels moved, the low light would be rolled along the beach, north or south, until if you were sailing into Lowestoft, you wanted to get into the roads down through the channel, then you had to get the red light in the low light lined up with the high light, and then you knew that the channel was safe. And the low light, as I said, I think it was the early 1920s when they finally disposed of the low light. In 1861, that strange wooden contraption, of which there are early photographs of, which dates from 1626-27, was replaced by a much nicer structure in 1862. Again, it was movable and served the same purpose, to line up the two lights to mark the channel. So we move to the next slide again, please. Now, I hope you can see this. This is the internal growth of Lowestoft between 1600 and 1725. If you watch carefully, you'll see, hopefully, the 1725 map will bleed through the town map of 1600 or 1618. And you'll see, there it goes, you'll see that in actual fact, in that period, that 125-year period, the town didn't actually expand outwards. It expanded in on itself. Again, you'll see the 1725 map, I hope, disappear, fade out in a moment. There we go. Now we're back in 1618. So new properties are built within the existing townscape, and buildings were subdivided. And so there's no expansion out of Lowestoft for well over another 150 years, really, before the town expands beyond its borders. Now we come to the 18th century, and here you can see a panoramic view of the town. If we start from the top row, working from the right, you can see the highlight perched on the top of the cliff, whether Arnold's Walk, Arnold House, you can see the town chamber there, all the way along, and then the fish houses becoming the houses begin to build on what would become the beach village. I should have made the writing bigger on this, and I could read it better, couldn't I? You can see the fish houses. You can see the low light has been drawn in on here as well. You can see boats pulled up on the beach. You can see the Deans and the sand dunes. And again, if you want to see these in more detail, as I said, as Stephen has said, these will be kept to be viewed later. So 18th century Lowestoft is a town that's actually now slowly trying to rebrand itself, I think, if you like, a process called gentrification. And if we can flick to the next slide, please, Stephen. So many of the old houses, some of which post-dated the fire, some predated the fire, they were gentrified, as you can see from this particular house at the very north end of the High Street. Many of them are still timber framed inside, but very nice new fronts, higher than the original front, were put on them to give them a grander look. And here's a perfect example here, one in the High Street. And here's some more houses in the High Street. Some of them have been subdivided. The shop with the house next door in the middle of the picture was once one big house that was subdivided actually in the very early 1800s. But all of these houses sit on the foundations of much earlier ones. And by 1775, there are 445 houses in the town now, and but still the population hasn't grown that much. There's only 2,231 inhabitants. That's including lodges in the town. So Lowestoft is growing, but slowly. But more importantly, it's trying to, as I said, for want of a better expression, it's trying to rebrand itself and become more gentrified in this Georgian period. Can we move to the next slide, please? And of course, one thing that happened in Lowestoft at this time was the Lowestoft porcelain factory, 1757 to 1802. It's was set up in what now today is called Factory Street. The factory is gone. The factory finished product in 1802. But here you can see just some examples of the porcelain that was made there. Some of it was actually little trifles from Lowestoft to give people visiting the town in the embryonic tourist industry a little trifles to take away. Quite attractive, very attractive, a bit, and it's very, very collectible today. Now here you can see, you'll have seen this before. So here is Lowestoft. This is the very southern end of the parish. You see Lake Lothing there on the bottom left, the parish boundary in red. The other side of that is Kirkley. And right at the top, you can see the very south end of the town of Lowestoft. And by the Act of Parliament that you see on the screen there, because the ancient road close to the seaside was being washed away constantly, an Act of Parliament was passed to build this new road, which became known as the London Turnpike Road. So it's a dead straight road, finished in, I think it was 1787, the road was actually built. And now, instead of coming down this rather dangerous road, it would get flooded. And at that time, the parish boundaries were changed, and all the green that you saw on there was common land. and many of the commons were enclosed. And I need to get a context here because in some respects, this is quite important because it deals with the governance of the town as well. So these are called the lamplands. And I'm going to actually just quickly run through the process that led to the lamplands being built, and also led to the manor, many of the customs of the manor changing and being put into the hands of a embryonic town council. And so in 1770, you remember I mentioned the court leet. The court leet for the manor of Lowestoft, the last court leet was held in 1770. There's no more court leets being held in the town after that date. There's still the court baron, but no court leet. And on the 12th of November 1772, Sir Thomas Allen, who lived at Summerlayton Hall, he was lord of the manor. He was declared, according to the records in the Court of Chancery in London, he was declared to be a lunatic. No more detail than that. And the Court of Chancery appointed a committee to handle the manor's court affairs. So now, instead of having the lord of the manor, who was living a lunatic living at Summerlayton Hall, running the manor courts, there's now a committee doing it, and no chief tenants. 1795, the committee now have an oversight of all the common land, because they're now doing what the lord of the manor could do, and so therefore they had oversight of the common land. In 1795, the committee enclosed 15 acres of land on the South Common. That's some of the brown areas that you see there. The ones further to the north were the first ones to be enclosed. They enclosed 15 acres of land on the South Common, which are to be let, and the income used to improve the lamps and lighting of the streets of the town. Hence, they became known as the lamplands. So you've now got this committee, in actual fact, acting as if they're the lord of the manor. They're appointed by this order from the Court of Chancery. Then in 1800, there were the actual managers were 6 trustees appointed by the Court of Chancery. The acreage in 1805 of the lamplands was increased to 42 acres, the area that you see in brown on there. And the income could now also be used for making and keeping good the streets and pavements of the town, as well as for lights in the town. So now you've got a small committee, if you like, handling some of the management of the town, what have you. And the next move, which really is the beginning of a town council, if you like, in Lowestoft, was in 1810, when the trustees obtained an Act of Parliament entitled, it was for the better paving, lighting, cleansing, watching, and otherwise improving the town of Lowestoft. And this appointed 24 commissioners. They were appointed to manage the lamplands. They could also now borrow up to £4,000 of money if they needed it for the good of the town, and they could now levy rates onto the people who own property in Lowestoft, who would become the ratepayers. And under the Act of Parliament, officers of the town, that is the overseer of the poor, the highways, etc., they were now answerable directly to these commissioners, these improvement commissioners, rather than to the vestry. Obviously, the vestry, the church still looked after its own property, but now the other officers, including the constables, etc., were now being made to answer to this board of commissioners appointed by an act of parliament. So it is a big step in the changing of the management of Lowestoft. I put that in there because, as we shall see very shortly, this area around the Lamplands also played a part in another thing. Now, ladies and gents, we'll continue for a little bit longer. This is going to take, I'm not going to get through all I intended to do tonight. I thought I could do it by putting a little less detail in, but in actual fact, you can't really, without pricing this down to being bite-sized, and I don't do that. So I think probably what I shall be doing when I reach a certain point, I shall be finishing this for tonight, and I'm going to continue again in a fortnight's time. That'll give you a chance, hopefully, to go back over tonight's talk, see what I've done, and perhaps take in the presentation at your own leisure, rather than being kind of chivied along by me live at the moment. But we'll go on to a couple more slides if we can, please, Stephen. And of course, this is a painting done showing that turnpike. Remember, I referred to the turnpike road. This is the London Turnpike. We're down at the bottom end now, basically outside Lowestoft railway station, looking straight up the turnpike road towards the old town sitting at the top of the hill. And of course, this continued right the way through as one straight road, right the way through to Pakefield. And you can see the train line in the foreground going across to the docks and the harbour that had been built by that time. So that's the London Turnpike and the Lamplands. Again, I've covered this in some depth in another one of my earlier talks, the building of the first harbour, why build a harbour at Lowestoft. And there's the Act of Parliament that authorised it. And here you can see now the area where it says the entrance to the new harbour. That's run by the Lamplands. They've cut through the Lamplands to Lake Lothing. Lake Lothing has become a harbour. You can see the dead straight turnpike road running south from the old town, Lowestoft town. There's the low lighthouse at the bottom of the cliff. The high light, you can see almost off the map at the thing. This is an 1832 map of the area after the cut to make the new harbour. As I said, I've dealt with this in another talk some weeks ago, which again you can view retrospectively if you want more information about the growth of the harbour. But you can see the main town of Lowestoft is still sitting on the cliff top there, as it had done from the 14th century onwards. Not a lot has changed, and much has changed, depends how you look at it. The next slide I want to show you, and this is going to be my sort of penultimate one, if I've got these in the right order. In 1844, Samuel Morton Peto, the great Victorian entrepreneur and builder of railways, came to Lowestoft with the suggestion of making a railway from Lowestoft. He'd already built one in 1840 from Great Yarmouth to Norwich, and he persuaded the town that that it would benefit the town to build a railway from Lowestoft to link up with the Norwich Yarmouth line at Reedham, and so Lowestoft trains could get quickly to Norwich and further afield inlands to various cities. And also he was going to improve the harbour at the same time, and so that fish landed at the harbour could be shipped by train on this new railway to Norwich and beyond. And this great undertaking was agreed upon. An Act of Parliament was passed enabling this to happen. And if we move on to the next slide, please. Here's the Act of Parliament, which created P2's Lowestoft Harbour and Railway Company. This was passed in 1845, and this enabled a railway line built by P2's company to run from Lowestoft through to Reedham, join up with the Yarmouth-Norwich line, and then hence inland. And this is one of the trains that would have run along it. The 1st of July 1847, the Lowestoft Reedham Railway opened for passenger trains, and in 1859 the Lowestoft Beccles line opened. And here you can see by 1832 the town is slowly expanding southwards down beside the Turnpike Road. So if we if I just work my way down here, the Deans, those hundreds and hundreds of acres of low-lying land below the cliff. There's the old town, the beach village, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. There's the battery and the Battery Green, a gun battery again. That's the subject of another story. A big estate called the Grove, the new harbour, and of course, most importantly, along the sides of the London Turnpike Road, you've got the new suburbs that are growing up. Those plots of land are slowly being developed and houses are being built there. And of course, a chapel of ease was felt necessary as the town did start to expand, so that in inclement weather, the people of Lowestoft could make their way, didn't have to make their way 3/4 of a mile to the Parish Church of St Margaret, sitting on the site of Aylmer's Doomsday Church, but they had no excuse because there was a chapel right on the edge of town where they could go. So, as I say, in all directions, the town is slowly changing, it's evolving, its management is evolving, the governing of the town is evolving. And if we want, just push on for another slide, please, Stephen. There is St Peter's Chapel, finally decided to make an appearance there. That's the chapel opened in 1872. I just want to say now just a little bit, because it goes hand in glove with the railway at P2, the harbour. Up until P2 came along, all of the fishing since medieval times, anything was done from the beach. And here's a view of the North Beach at Lowestoft. Pre the building of a harbour, pre the building of a railway, and this is looking north, and if you've got good eyesight you can actually see the low light on the Deans right in the distance on the extreme left. But this is the harbour, and we just see quickly the growth of the harbour. This is the harbour that was built in 1830, just an entrance to the by the time P2 had finished, 1856, this is how the harbour had extended. And we move on from there. It's all of the time, the fishing fleet is getting bigger and bigger. And by 1886, a new herring and mackerel dock has had to be built and dug to the north of the Peto Harbour, we'll call it, although it's the Norfolk Railway Company that financed it. And in 1906, yet another dock was needed because the size of the fishing fleet. I'm going to actually do one more slide, and then this is where I'm going to stop for this evening. So just the size of the fishing fleet to give you some idea. Here's a photograph taken in the harbour. It's approximately 50 fishing boats fishing off the beach in Lowestoft in 1800. By 1880, there were approximately 450 fishing boats fishing out of the harbour now, not off the beach. And by 1914, there are approximately 800 fishing boats in Lowestoft, and that doesn't include the Scottish boats that came during the herring season, October and November every year, to swell the fishing fleets in Lowestoft to the best part of 1,000 vessels. So in just over 100 years, the fleet has gone from being a nominal fleet fishing off the beach to one of the biggest fishing fleets in the town. And the inner harbour as well, that improved and got bigger and bigger. And here we can see 1852, Lowestofts had already imported 10,742 oxen, 52 horses, 7,703 sheep and 423 pigs. And other imports included grain, oil cake, cheese, coal, timber, stone, oil, silk, wool, hemp, slate and guano. Suddenly, this second half of the 19th century, Lowestoft has really taken off. And that's the point I'm going to, no, in fact, I won't. I'll do one more here because this, okay, you remember the 1810 Act of Parliament setting up this 24 commissioners appointed to manage the lamplands and also to levy rates and for the better paving, lighting, cleansing and watch and otherwise improving the town of Lowestoft. In 1854, a real town council as such was set up called the Improvement Commissioners. This was under the Lowestoft Improvement Act of 1854, and a copy of it I have there. And in that time, the incorporated into the Improvement Commissioners, they were elected by ratepayers and proper municipal elections, and included in the area to be managed was south of Lake Lothing, the parish of Kirkley, and that would become designated South Lowestoft. So really in 1854, at a stroke, the Improvement Commissioners were able to expand the catchment area of the town of Lowestoft. And in 1860, Lowestoft's first town hall was built in the High Street on the site of the now sadly closed present-day town hall. This town hall was actually built on the site of an old townhouse that was built in 1698 to replace a dilapidated chapel that had stood there since we don't know when really. It's probably a couple of hundred years old by the end of the 17th century. So there's been a long history of buildings of some sort of civic nature, ecclesiastical nature on this site possibly since the town moved across from its original site in the early 14th century. And this is, I think, it's a good place to stop now. I had hoped I'd get through it a lot, but I'm not going to. So rather than just whipped through it. We're going to stop at that point. I do apologise, but we've come back. There's still a lot more stuff to come for the more recent history of the town, and I hope you found some of that interesting. As I say, I think I underestimated how long it was going to take me to do this presentation. So I'm going to continue this again next in a fortnight's time, if I'm spared that long, which I hope I will be. And also, it will give you a chance, I hope, if you're interested enough, to go back over what I've done tonight and perhaps just have a reprise, a look at it again and absorb it. And on top of that, I have to stop talking because my voice is gone. Thank you.
In that case, Ivan, let me take over if you don't mind.
No.
Wonderful talk tonight. I was absolutely fascinated by the swollen figures of the fishing fleet of Lowestoft alone. You know, in 80 years to have increased by, what was that, 9-fold, and then and by 16-fold within pretty much a century. It's just incredible figures, isn't it? Incredible. A few comments I'll read out if you don't mind. We have one from Philip Manning, who again, I think that's quite a new name for our comment section. Philip Manning says, really interesting. He's got a little emoji with a monocle on. Chris Collins says, copyhold sounds a bit like leasehold, and but I think you went on to explain that in quite some depth. Chris Collins said also, really interested in Lowestoft porcelain. And she said, dispute with Great Yarmouth? Never. My old mate, James Wright, I hope you're well, James. Lovely to know you're still enjoying these. He says, thanks, Ivan. As always, very interesting and quite educational.
Thanks, James.
He's a good lad. Chris Collins said, wow, thank you very much, Ivan. Already looking forward to the next instalment. Yeah, as soon as you said we're going to continue with this Aspects of Lowestoft, I was also very pleased. Thank you, Ivan. And I've put, for everybody that can see it, I managed to type it in for the next session, episode 19. Please tune in on Monday, the 26th of October, one fortnight's time, for episode 19 of the Lowestoft History Sessions with Ivan Bunn. We'll be continuing the talk of Aspects of Lowestoft. Now, Linda Boyce, she says, thank you, Ivan. It was all very interesting.
Thank you, Linda.
Karen Godbold says, thanks for your presentation. Enjoyable and really informative. And I think we'd all agree with that. A couple of things I will just say before we depart, if you don't mind, Ivan, and that is to say thank you very much to People's Health Trust. They fund not just the history sessions, but also the shanty sessions on a Tuesday night. They fund them through the Active Communities programme. And the aim is to keep people engaged with their community and engaged with the local history and the culture. And we certainly think Ivan does that really well. We do our best to do that as well with the shanty sessions on a Tuesday night. They're funded by People's Health Trust, and that was back when we were able to meet in person. We're going to try it one more time tomorrow night. For those of you that have already booked a space, because the spaces were limited, we'll see you there. And for anybody that would like to join in, whether or not you're an existing rogue or somebody that's joined us through the social distancing period, or somebody that's not joined us on a Tuesday night, but you've been enjoying Ivan's history sessions and you're wondering what on earth we're talking about, come along on the Rogues Shanty Chorus Facebook page or the YouTube channel, and you can join in with the kind of fun that we have. A couple more comments is Jackie Draper says, thank you, Paul and Ivan and People's Health Trust. Thank you very much, Jackie. And
thank you,
also
Jackie.
Karen Bold says, my nan used to tell us that you could walk one end of the harbour to the other by walking on fishing boats. Yeah, I've heard exactly the same thing. Karen, I think it's incredible. You know, you were talking about the figures, that 800 figure for 1914, and that's just, as you said, that's just Lowestoft's fleet, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you think
you've got a similar size fleet sailing out of Great Yarmouth.
Yeah, I mean, say walk across the harbour. It sounds almost like you could walk across Lowestofts Harbour all the way into Great Yarmouth Harbour if they were end for end. That's huge amounts, huge amounts. One thing I like to point out as we head off, and that is that anybody that would like to take the interest in these history sessions further, and I know you've all enjoyed them immensely. Don't forget of episode 18, which we're on tonight. There are 17 more available to view if you haven't. They're all as interesting, but in individual ways. So they're available on our Facebook page, or most of them are available on our YouTube channel. Have a good look if there's anything you want to pick up on, and just get a general feel for some more knowledge. They're all fascinating, and they're all available to view. And the next one, episode 19, will be available in 2 weeks, because we'll be joined here 7:30 p.m. the regular time by Ivan Bunn for the next instalment. And as I say, if you want to take it even further than that, still, I can highly recommend some fascinating publications. One would be this one. Now, this is A Trial of Witches by Gilbert Guise and Ivan Bunn. That's available to buy from Waterstones, or perhaps you could order it at your local bookstore. There's also George Borrow, Alton and Beyond. That's by Mr. Ivan Bunn himself. There's A Return to Haunted Lowestoft by Ivan Bunn and Henry Baker, featuring Where Witches Once Walked. And finally, The Trial of the Lowestoft Witches, which is a facsimile of the original report of the trial of Amy Denny and Rose Cullender, 1662. That's edited by Henry Baker with a foreword by Ivan Bunn. All of those books would make fabulous Halloween presents if you're into that kind of thing, especially the Witches and the Haunted Lowestoft one. One more question from Chris Collins, and I think she's picking you up on your history is impeccable, but a lot of people seem to struggle to tell Stephen and I apart. So my name is Paul, and the other one, who looks a bit like me, is Stephen. But you'll find that we answer to all sorts of names, if I'm honest, Chris. But I'm Paul. That's Ivan.
Next time, can you write it with an indelible pen across your forehead, your name?
I've only just managed to wipe that off, Ivan. I'll get it tattooed. Hang on. I think we're going to be trying it. Hold on. There he is. Right. So,
hello, Stephen.
Hi, Ivan.
This one's Paul.
Have your ears been burning tonight, Stephen?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that, Paul.
That's right. We look like three peas out of a pod. Anyway, Chris, that should answer the question. Thank you ever so much, Ivan.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah.
Wonderful talk. We'll catch you in a couple of weeks. And for everybody else, please do join us tomorrow night, 7:30, right here on the Facebook page or the YouTube channel. You can join in with the shanty sessions, even if you're not one of the people that were able to book a place. We're really looking forward to meeting up with them in person, but that means we can really enjoy your company right here on the Facebook page. Anyway, good night, Ivan. Take care, everyone.
Right, good night, everyone. Good night, Paul.